This is how you set up the Sony FX30 for cinematic filmmaking. Welcome back to the channel. It's me, Danny Slaz. We are going to fly through these settings, so make sure you save this video for future reference. Let's get into it. We're going to go to Menu, Main 1. We're going to use DCI 4K because this does give us a wider aspect ratio. If we need to use 120 frames per second, we're going to want to use the XAVC-S or the XAVC-HS 4K, depending on what system you're running. If you have a Mac with M series processor or a PC with QuickSync compatibility, then you're going to want to use the HS. We use DCI 4K because it uses more of the sensor and gives us, again, that wider cinematic aspect ratio. DCI 4K gives us smoother playback and scrubbing since it's not as resource intensive. XAVC-HS, which is an H.265 codec, can reduce blocking artifacts, but it doesn't give us extra width, which is important for that anamorphic look. We choose 23.98 over 24 if we include 59.94 or 119.88 for compatibility. If we don't need higher frame rates, we shoot true 24. If true integer 60 and 120 frames per second were available, we'd use those instead of fractional frame rates. ATSC replaced NTSC and supports both integer and fractional frame rates here in North America. You can use integer frame rates, but never mix frame rates on the same timeline. This will cause problems. If you're outside of North America, check your regional standards to ensure proper playback. For our shutter speed, we're going to set our shutter speed as close to double the frame rate as possible. For example, if we're using 23.98, we want to use 1/148th of a second. In regards to our ISO, we want to use manual. We do not want to have auto ISO set on, and we also want to have it set to flexible ISO. This allows us to use 400 ISO, which is best for controlled lighting and darker scenes because this provides an extra stop of dynamic range on the shadows, which creates less noise. But keep in mind, this does cause highlights to clip more easily. For everything else, we're going to want to use 800 and 2500, our native base ISOs. If you don't believe me about the shift in dynamic range towards the shadows when using 400 ISO, check out a video that Gerald Undone created on how signal noise amplification and dynamic range shifts with the ISO. For our aperture and depth of field, we're going to adjust based on the desired look, but generally speaking, shallow depth of field is usually associated with cinematic aesthetics. A little bit of homework for you is to learn about hyperfocal distance and how to leverage it for maximum cinematic control. We want to always set our white balance to our light source. Generally speaking, we never want to leave it on auto. If we shoot over to sgamut3.cine/slog3, this is optimized for cinematic looks and provides a wider color space beyond Rec 709 and DCI P3, while also providing better highlight roll-off and more natural skin tones out of camera. Since we're going to be using a log format, we're going to want to use a LUT, and that LUT's going to be 709, 800%. This gives us a proper preview of contrast and exposure. We also do not want to embed this LUT. That's very important. Now we're going to want to speak about the audio settings. Using a shotgun mic like the Komica VM30 that I use when I'm out in the field, I typically set my in-camera settings to +5, and then I control the gain on my mic first and use the camera's preamp as a last resort to avoid noise. For my stabilization, I use Steady Shot Active. This helps smooth out the handheld shots while keeping a natural look. My autofocus settings are typically autofocus continuous with human and eye priority mode on for better subject tracking. I do use flexible spot, medium or small, because this is best for precise control, while I also use zone and wide because this is pretty good for run and gun style situations. Now we want to fine tune our autofocus for cinematic shots. And the first thing we want to do is make sure our autofocus transition speed is set to as low as possible, because this is going to give us more cinematic focus pulls. In addition, there is one sleeper setting called Autofocus Assist, and this lets you manually adjust focus with your focus ring, and when you stop, autofocus locks onto the new subject. Super useful for controlled focus shifts, but it is a little finicky, so you got to be careful. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to see next. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you in the next one.